Are we live here? I think we are. I'm starting to see numbers come up at the bottom. I'll give it a second. But good morning, everyone. On behalf of Easter Seals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, my name is Darnell Burton, Vice President of Development. Really appreciate you guys for joining us this morning on a conversation that's probably much needed, specifically here during History Month. Our title today is Candid Conversations, More Than a Title, Building Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace. But there's this piece of that as well. Now that you have a seat at the table, how do you build trust, collaboration, and do you feel that you're included in your workspace? In today's call, we have some fantastic panelists, Ron Wages, Danielle Pemberton-Heard, Deva Newman, and Dexter Hendricks. Want to give it just a little bit more time here, and then once we do that, we'll turn it over to those folks to introduce themselves. Only about one more minute, and then Ron, you're still over here on my left side, and I'm going to steal you first, and then we're going to go man, woman, so I don't want to leave anybody out here.
Words.
Just so you guys know, as we're waiting for folks to jump on, we're going to go ahead and launch our poll. If you guys would take a few minutes and answer these questions, later on during the conversation, we'll have an opportunity to discuss. One more minute, and then I'm going to jump to you, Ron.
Words.
Ron, let's go ahead and get started with you. If you take a moment and please introduce yourself, we'd really appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Darnell. My name is Ron Wages. I describe myself in many ways, a husband, a father, a professional, but most of all, a Christian. And when I say Christian, it's Christian the verb, not Christian the noun. It really defines what I do, how I act, and how people see me is the biggest description. Professionally, undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from the University of Maryland, College Park, MBA from University of Houston. Started my career in high tech with Texas Instruments. I was there 10 years, lived in Dallas, Austin, and Houston. From there, decided to try my luck in Canada. Went up to Vancouver, British Columbia for a while. Was vice president of marketing and had a small R&D team up there. Then moved down to Santa Barbara, California, signal processing software company. I was vice president of business development and handled the sales function there also. Was transferred to Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, back in the go-go days in 1999. And where everybody was rich, and had some fun. I joined a semiconductor operation in Research Triangle Park, ended up running that in U.S. operations for about 4 or 5 years. Then moved on to start my own company, had an LED lighting company for a few years, spent more money than I made, but I had a lot of fun and learned a lot. And then I joined the utility sector. With Progress Energy and now Duke Energy. And I currently am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Duke Energy for the enterprise, having a good time, having the opportunity to have impact. And I'm really, really looking forward to the conversation today.
Ron, we really appreciate that. Danielle?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really pleased to be here with everyone. I'm Danielle Pemberton-Heard. I'm Chief Legal Officer and a Managing shareholder with Diversified Search here. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. office. We're a national executive search firm. I found my way to search after spending many years in legal and business affairs functions, first starting my career as an associate in law firms in both Connecticut and New York City, then transitioning in-house. Actually, the opportunity that brought me to Washington, D.C. was to join a little known cable company at the time in Bethesda, Maryland called Discovery Communications, when they had under 300 employees.
Wow.
And then from there, transitioned and worked for Time Warner, AOL, Thales Communications, which is French-owned communications and defense systems company. So I've worked in various sectors in the legal space, but ultimately the through line of, I think my career has always been engaging with people, supporting individuals who were looking to move about in their career, and having the good fortune to have people who also lifted as they climbed and brought me along, exposed me to new opportunities, and frankly told me that I could do it. So I'm really happy to be here, because I think that what we do and how we engage individuals that we come in contact with daily can make a difference in people's lives and in their careers. And that's what it's about.
Danielle, I appreciate that. You just said two things that I like to use, lifting as we climb, and the mentorship piece. I want to come back to have that conversation about someone pulling you along through the space. It's a conversation that I'm having a lot now with friends as well as younger people. As you kind of grow in your career, how do you lift as you climb and pull those ones along again to have that seat at the table? Dexter, your chance.
So good morning, everyone. And Darnell, before I start, first I'd like to give a shout out to my colleague and friend Pamela Fountain Brown for making the initial introduction and tossing my name in the hat to be amongst this panel here. And as eager as I am to share my experiences, I'm also eager to hear the experiences of all my other panel members here. And I would like to thank them all in advance for sharing. So Dexter Hendricks, graduated from Rutgers University with a mechanical engineering degree, working for Turner for the past 20 years. Currently, I am in the community and citizenship space. We stand on 3 pillars of outreach and service, youth and workforce development, as well as economic development. So you might ask to switch from engineering to what I currently hold now in social corporate responsibility. Early on in my career, I had a chance to do some mentoring to some younger students to kind of introduce construction as a viable career choice. And during my presentation, I stood up in front of a class of about 20 or so 6th graders and told them that I was a mechanical engineer. And one gentleman in the back, kind of doubted me and said, "You ain't no mechanical engineer." And I said, "Well, why would you not think that?" And he said, "Because you're Black." Wow. From then to now, that has stuck with me. And I remember sharing that story with my leadership and vowing to myself that I needed to do more in that space to ensure that no other Black boy has, put that kind of limitation on themselves. So I switched in 2008 from engineering, boots in the mud, concrete, steel, the whole nine, to my current role now as being an advocate for people of color, businesses of color, minority-owned businesses, etc. So I do value the opportunity that I have here to share my experiences, and look forward to a fruitful and engaging conversation.
Dexter, I thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I'll share a quick story. You guys may hear this. I'll share some tidbits about myself. As a college student, I was an engineering or a co-op manager intern with a company out of Chicago. I was their first African-American construction management intern for $1 billion firm that had been around since I think the 40s. And so to your point, putting people in places where they haven't been before, and folks would see me drive the company car into my neighborhood and it's like, "What company is that? What do you do?" And when I would talk about being an engineer, they're like, "You can't be an engineer. You're one of the guys in construction that's out there working." And I said, "Well, part of my co-op is I'm actually lifting. I worked as a laborer one summer, as a carpenter another summer, and then I learned the trades the next summer." But people were really surprised because they didn't even know about the project management side, nor did I, right? And so from the boots in the mud to the office, that's a big transition. And so I appreciate you talking about that. Yeah, thanks, yeah. Dexter. Deva,
and finally, Darnell, I'd like to add that I am a husband and a father as well, too.
You need to please mention that, because we do not want to get you in
trouble. Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Deva?
Yeah, we don't want to forget all of that. Those are important things. I am a wife and mom of one 18-year-old. And I am the SVP of brand creative for VH1, Smithsonian, and TV Land, all a part of the MTV Entertainment Group at Viacom CBS. So I've enjoyed close to 30 years in the media industry, career start at BET, funny enough, in creative services, but also freelanced on documentaries. And I had a stint at Discovery too, but moved to news and special projects and while at BET, and after working on a number of news projects, really had an affinity there. I'm dating myself, but
I was gonna say, you look 25, so when you said 30 years, that was not believable to the audience. I'm sure they do not believe that, but go ahead.
yeah, I'm gonna date myself even more. I worked with Ed Gordon on the big O.J. Simpson interview after the infamous
Wow.
trial.
Mhm.
So that really gave me the bug to continue on with news, and I became more focused on a news career. So I took the opportunity, an opportunity in New York to field produce for Dateline NBC. So I spent close to 5 years, really memorable years at NBC, on the road, covering mostly investigative stories. Most notably, probably the Columbine High School shooting was a big one during my time there. I spent way too much time in Colorado. But I learned a lot in news, but my husband and I wanted to start a family, so being on the road was just tough and challenging. So I explored a career move and had a very close friend with a fantastic career at Viacom and MTV, who now works at Easter Seals, Darlene Chapman Holmes. And she was like, "Oh my God, you should see what it's like here at Viacom." And an opportunity came up to work in the promotions group for Nickelodeon and Nick at Night. It actually seemed like a leap from long form news to short form entertainment promotion, but I went for it and haven't looked back since. And I've been with Viacom close to 20 years now. I've built a career as a creative marketer, and I've worked on most of the brands within the company during my time here. From Nick to TV Land to Paramount Network, and now I oversee, like I said, the suite of 3 with VH1, Smithsonian, and TV Land. Me and my team of creators are responsible for developing and executing, brand voice and marketing, most all properties connected to the channels, that are programmed on our linear, social, and digital platforms. We also just added to our plate Paramount Plus, which launches next month. We'll be handling promotion for many of our shows that are going that route. And as you can imagine, I collaborate with many internal and external partners, and diversity and inclusion is always top of mind. So whether it's consumer facing with our content or with talent, or internal with our teams and partnerships, we have to continue to be conscious and aware and make sure decision makers are doing the same with regard to D&I.
Well, let me stop here. Fantastic. You guys have traversed, it seems like, lots of different job and careers. And excuse me, Danielle, that's the first question I'm going to start with you. But before I get there, I just want to congratulate you all on being able to, traverse this corporate and nonprofit landscape, number one. Number two, it's interesting to see how folks have kind of gone from this career to that career. And Danielle, let's start there. But before we go there, for anyone who's on the panel, who's in the audience, first of all, thank you for joining us today. On behalf of Easter Seals, DC, Maryland, Virginia, I really appreciate you being here. Again, my name is Darnell Burton. I'm the Vice President of Development for Easter Seals. We would love for you guys to ask your questions in the Q&A box or the chat box. I would ask the panelists, if you're not talking at that time, to take a peek at those questions and offer your advice. Or if you want to raise your hand and say, "Hey, Darnell, we've got a great question in the Q&A box. Would love to address this." But please, anybody, feel free to ask any questions and join in when your time's allotted. Danielle, let's start with you. Working in this diversified search space, or working in the search space, talk to me about what you're hearing everyone talk about, that traversing of those different careers, and how does that, particularly now when we talk about having a seat at the table, what are you guys looking for in this marketplace when you're talking about executive search? And how are you when you're having that conversation about having a seat at the table, what kind of folks are you looking at? And what kind of backgrounds are you saying, that's the kind of person we'd like to start to have this conversation with? And talk to me about that in two phases. One, what you're looking for in that person, but two, how you're looking to bring those people to conversation, as far as these are the types of folks that we say can sit at those executive seats.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because I think the thing that most individuals don't understand is that executive search really works for the corporation. So when we're retained, we are retained by the corporation to help them identify talent. So unlike a placement agency that works for the individual or the talent that's looking to be placed, we're working for the corporation. And I think in this environment, we're finding companies that have a sincere intention to diversify their ranks, to expand the aperture for new talent. But there is just a lack of knowledge about where they can find talent. And I think what we're finding is everyone thinks they can call the few diverse people that they know within their ranks. They can offer incentives for people to recruit people. But this really is a critical time to have professionals helping you identify talent, helping you look at things differently. If you are a bank that's looking for a CEO that perhaps is a Black male, but you're using the old model of basically recruiting someone who's already been a sitting bank CEO into that role, then you're not going to get the diverse pool that you want because there's no one else in that seat. So you really need a sophisticated approach to working with your executive recruiter who can help you identify the core competencies, who can help you really suss through your cultural traits to make sure that the talent you're onboarding is going to be successful. And I think it's really critical to look at talent and especially talent in the C-suite with a new lens. And that means that there are definitely transferable skills that people in the nonprofit space have, that typically things were siloed. If you were a nonprofit leader, you continued to play in that space and you didn't cross over. If you were a for-profit leader, oftentimes in the twilight of your career, you may shift into a nonprofit space and bring some of that experience to bear. But they're really, things were very much segregated. And what we're finding, and the thing that makes our firm unique, is we play in the nonprofit space, we play in the higher ed space, we play in the corporate space, and we place leaders, senior members of teams, as well as boards of directors in those sectors. And that allows you to really drill down, look at talent, and have authentic relationships. So you can bring people to the table who you're confident can do the role. And perhaps their career trajectory may not be typical, may not be reflective of the incumbent, but they've got the skills to succeed. And we are there to coach the talent, but more importantly, to open the client's eyes to the talent that's really before them.
Danielle, I really appreciate that. Ron, I want to come to you because you, like Dexter, I mean, it seems like everyone has an interesting trajectory, and kind of piggybacking off of what Danielle talked about is, you know, 30 years ago, I remember my father worked for the city of Chicago and he was there his entire career, right? Talk to me, if you will, Ron, about your trajectory to how you've gotten a seat at the table in two ways. Number one, why do you think that trajectory has worked? But number two, can you talk about the folks that may have helped you along or the decisions that may have helped you transition from being what I call the practical engineer to being the more community engaged, diversity, equity, inclusion space person?
Darnell, excellent question. And, one of the things that you highlighted starting out was that we were going to be transparent.
Yes, please be transparent.
Yeah, because we can't learn and understand unless we have transparency. I did start quite a few years ago. I came out of undergrad in the mid 80s, and my first job, Texas Instruments. And I remember my first day on the job. got on the elevator, met a gentleman, and you got to meet people. So I said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Ron." You don't talk on the elevator. I didn't know the rules. So the gentleman said, "Hey, hi Ron, how are you?" I'm like, "I'm fine." And he goes, "My name's Kevin." I'm like, "No problem." So Kevin and I talked for all of 9 floors until we got there. And I said, "Hey, we should do lunch sometimes." He says, "Okay." I'm behind the glass doors back here. Well, I didn't realize the glass doors had significance. I'm sitting at my new desk probably an hour later, and Kevin comes by and says, "Ron, how's it going?" And I'm like, "I'm good." So Kevin goes back. The guy next to me goes, "How in the world can you meet the worldwide senior vice president of sales and marketing on your first day?" And it was just by happenstance. Kevin ended up being my mentor at Texas Instruments. And he allowed me to really do some things there. I was the first African-American in the program that I was taken into. And TI treated me very, very well. I was there for 10 years. I didn't leave TI. Again, I was younger, a bit more brash, was successful, and falsely thought that all the success was me as opposed to the team that I was associated with. And when I didn't get the first promotion that I thought I deserved, I bolted. I went to Canada. I'm going like Paul Robeson, okay? And that's how I ended up. I took a vice president position, small public company, great experience. Hindsight being 2020, probably left a little too early. Some of the individuals that I was colleagues with are running the company now.
Wow.
But I still had a great time and learned a lot. And it was from that position, actually being in the boardroom relatively early in my career, did I truly understand business and how business worked. And that did help me to move into some of the other positions that I've had. Through that, though, I did recognize that mentorship is important, not just for me, but for other individuals. I take it as a part of my personal accountability to always have at least three people that I'm coaching, and 3 people that I'm giving some unfiltered, difficult conversations. If it comes down to an individual that, cutting his own hair, and this is a true story, cutting his own hair and not sending his shirts to the dry cleaners, and that's what the culture is, to have that conversation with them, say, go to the barbershop, okay? Don't come in with rough, dry clothes anymore, okay? Those shoes, throw them away. Those are conversations that I've had with individuals to help them to meet the types of things that they're looking to accomplish.
Ron, let me jump in and pause you there, because I think this is a big one, and not one to cut you off. We're 1/3 of the way there already, guys. We've already taken up 1/3 of our time, and I want to ask you guys 10,000 questions. Ron, you just hit on something, and I want to traverse over to Deva, and then come back to you and Dexter.
Right.
First of all, thank you. Talk to me, Ron. That was a big one. Talk to me, Deva, if you will, about the spaces and places, right? And so spaces and places meaning, are you joining an organization for the space or the place and the time? Ron, let me explain what I mean. You talked about being on the elevator and having that conversation and having that mentor that kind of walks you through and dragged you along. Deva, talk to me, if you will, about the types of organizations we join, specifically as African Americans. Does that make the difference in how you're able to traverse the landscape? For instance, going to one firm versus another and having one title versus another, is that organization specific, or is that title specific, or is that really mentorship specific? And I ask you that because you've been to BET, Viacom, some of those places. So Ron, thank you for that alley-oop there. You're on mute there for me, Deva.
I just noticed that.
A lot of people asking questions, guys. This is a hot topic, so go ahead.
For me, it's been experience specific. It was the reason that I've kind of made the pivots and that I've made, and what I feel like I gain when I would make those decisions to move. Experience with regard to professional growth, with regard to networking, I think all of that has been important, whether you at NBC, and I had a mentor who was one of the VPs of in the news division. And I think I wouldn't have had that had I not made that move. And then at Viacom, it's been not only my peers and the folks that I work with, you know, in the area of the business, but folks like powerhouse Marva Smalls. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but she is a, you know, powerhouse in the inclusion area at Viacom. And, you know, she plucked me. She was like, we're starting affinity groups within the company. And we have a number of them, mostly ethnic-based affinity groups. But I want to see if you and a few other of your female executives at Viacom would be open to piloting a women executive affinity group. And it was an amazing experience because, you know, now 5 years in, I feel like our middle level managers have moved up to more executive level managers. And I think a lot of it was because all of the hard work that we put in, you know, working in that space. So it's been really important to have that experience, not only with my role as a marketer, but also with the company in helping with diversity inclusion.
Thanks, Deva. I appreciate that. Dexter, I told you I was going to come to you and ask you this question specifically when we first had our conversation. So guys, let me throw this up. Dexter's background is a little different. He grew up in the Virgin Islands and then came to the States. And so one of the things that we talked about prior to us being here was not being raised with an American mentality of an African American and what that means in the corporate spaces. And I was a little caught off guard. A friend of mine was born in the Bahamas, and he used to always say, he used to come at this conversation very differently than my friends from Chicago. And so Dexter, I want to come back to you about being in this space, but really more your mentality and your thought process coming from the Virgin Islands here. And then I want to come back to Danielle and ask a question.
So Darnell, I appreciate that question. And let me start by saying this. By the time I finished my degree and started my career at Turner as a mechanical engineer, the one thing that that came easy for me was assimilation. And that's the one thing I learned to do very well. And meaning, like you mentioned, I grew up in a different culture and in the Caribbean. So at that point, I really learned how to figure out things and learn really quickly. I had to learn how to dress in the wintertime and speak so that folks could understand me and I wouldn't have to repeat myself so much. I remember going to class in late fall and coming outside and it was dark and I was panicking. I'm looking around like, wow, what's happened? So there were some things that I definitely had to get used to. Even my time in the military has taught me to assimilate. You know, we all wear green. Everybody's a soldier. Don't stand out. You know, if you do anything unlike everybody else, you're trying to prove yourself or something like that. So I really had to. I was really good at assimilating. So here I am in corporate America, a new environment, and I refer back to the fact that I was really good at fitting in. The only difference now is I was doing it without even knowing I was doing it. So it was already ingrained in my subconscious. But what I didn't realize at the time, but it was also the thing that made me a great team player, but it's also allowed me to not see many of my blind spots. Now, what I mean is that this behavior did not allow me to see the microaggressions and some of the covert nuances that was happening because I was so accustomed of fitting in and trying to do it. So I couldn't really understand or relate to those that had a hard time fitting in. And I had to make sure that I checked that with myself because the lack of representation at higher levels, as it became evident and apparent, I became the only one in those circles. So, I had those uncomfortable feelings and at that point I realized that I was in fact different, right? I was at that crossroads of diversity and inclusion, diversity, seeing yourself in a room and inclusion, being yourself in a room. In fact, I'll share with you this quick story. I remember going to a training and many of my trainings, I was the only one in there. And one of the icebreakers they used was, name and, favorite album, right? So in my mind, I was like, wow, it has to be John Band from St. Thomas. That's my favorite album. But yeah, it's going to relate to that Calypso band that was on an island of 40,000 people. So at that point, I actually had to assimilate and kind of switch. And I ended up coming up with, Off the Wall, Michael Jackson. What's a great album, by the way. But it wasn't my first choice. So talk about inclusion as being yourself in a room. At that point, I did have to pivot and assimilate. So it did open up a lot of my blind spots. And
Dexter, I appreciate it. No, thank you very much for that. And I thought that was important. And I'm going to, Ron, I want you to, in a second, take one of the questions from the Q&A. But before we go to that, I want to come to Danielle. And you just talked about something that was really key, Dexter. This DEI word, Dexter, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a buzzword or is a buzz phrase, or is it a buzz phrase? Danielle, what does it really mean? Like, what is diversity, equity, inclusion? What does that look like for organizations? And we talked about this seat at the table. How is that being incorporated when you're doing these searches for that seat at the table? Is now really the precipice of time when that's changing? Or is this just a window where folks are open to it and it's going to go away? Danielle. You're on mute.
I'd like to think that this is just the opening of the door and that the door will swing wide open. I think that, I saw one of the questions in the Q&A spoke about privilege. And I think that there is an awakening in the minds of many to really understand what that privilege is and how anti-racist work really can make the difference, and people are having honest and courageous conversations. And I think if you're in the room, if you have a seat at the table, if you are on a bench on the perimeter of the room, it's imperative for you to speak up, speak out, and really call people on their flawed thinking, perhaps, or their privilege or their assumptions. I can share a story where we were again presenting a slate of candidates to a client, and they were looking at everyone through the lens of the incumbent, who was, a 60-plus-year-old male that was not of color and pretty much had grown up in that sector. And it really took some work to sort of change people's thinking. And again, they're your client, so you're sitting there trying to do so in a way without getting thrown out of the room. But it was really important to have that conversation and to help people, bring people along. These are really important times to have those conversations, to engage. And it's all about, it's no different than adaptive leadership. If you're a leader and perhaps you're an extrovert, but you have very talented people on your team, who aren't perhaps comfortable speaking up in the boardroom or in the room as you're teeing it up, create an agenda, give people the opportunity to provide you with their feedback, their thoughts by 5 p.m. the night before, so that you can then structure an orderly meeting and move things through. And these are the adaptive behaviors that everyone needs to really engage in and be thoughtful about doing so to get all voices at the table heard.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Ron, you want to answer that question for us, and then we're going to jump to Deva.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was really speaking to how is the role of more seasoned professionals being perceived as a part of the DE&I? And I think the answer really is it does, having been worked in a lot of different sectors and companies, it does depend on the culture of the company and the culture of the industry. In the utility sector, specifically at Duke Energy, believe it or not, the average age of our employees is right at 57.
Wow.
Yeah, so we've got an older workforce in general.
Don't say seasoned. Seasoned.
It's more seasoned. Well, since I'm over 57, I can say it, so it's all good.
Look great.
No, I appreciate that. But the key item, though, when we, being in the space, we focus on making sure that we think strategically and act tactically. So when our tactics and our measurements are, as you can imagine, it's around gender and ethnicity. But when we coach our leaders to look for diverse teams, we look across the board. The success stories that we share, have, individuals that, in management, in leadership positions on the same team, one being in their 20s and another one being over 60, male, female, African-American, Caucasian. Those are individuals that are going to make the best decisions or have an input into the best decisions and get the best results. So from a tactical perspective, we do measure the things that typically folks look at, but strategically when we teach and coach, we do make sure that we help everybody understand that you're looking for folks that are introverts and extroverts and make sure they have room for both types. And so those are the types of things that we teach and coach.
Thank you for that, Ron. I really appreciate that. Kind of switching a little bit, two things. Number one, my folks in the background, we have a fantastic team in the background that's making all this happen. So I want to thank them. 5 minutes post Deva, can you repost the questions that we listed for the poll questions? Deva, really thinking about you. I didn't watch a lot of the Super Bowl this year. That's a whole other story. But I think about brand, messaging, content, those types of things. As you're talking, as Danielle talked about, hopefully that this is an open door and we're walking through it, having open and honest conversations, having seen some of the things that have happened in our nation over the last 2 months. How are you in the media space addressing this seat at the table from a brand perspective? Like, what does that mean to really message effectively, and efficiently to that marketplace while having that DEI spend, but also addressing your larger customer population?
Well, me personally, I've had to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations in the past few months. And many of us have been put into the position of, having to be, the person in the room who is like responsible for, the apologies of what's going on right now, or, just the responsibility of the race almost, as far as what's going on, and educating people on a daily basis. And it's while it's heavy, and it has been heavy over the past several months, I think it's so important for us to use our voice at this time, more important than ever. I think with regard to media, I've been put in a position to kind of like, whether it's doing an on-air piece on what's happened with George Floyd, or doing taking this moment in history with regard to the election and what happened as far as the history-making election that we had, and what groundbreaking things happened in Georgia, and creatively putting that out there. But to be able to push those conversations and push those creative decisions to reach our consumers has been not very easy, internally. So just trying to have those conversations, and a lot of times it causes some disruption because folks have biases and they don't even realize it. So it's just those difficult conversations. But when you get to an aha moment, it's been amazing, because I do think people have been a little more open to wanting to learn more and understand more, and creatively putting out stories that really help get the conversation going as far as what's happening in our world.
Deva, I appreciate that. I could sense that was a challenging little bit of a conversation, but I really appreciate that. I want you to know why, because I have children that span ages from very young to college student, and what's coming into their visuals, sometimes I can't see what's in their room. And it's funny that my 8-year-old is the one who's really the most engaged versus my 19-year-old, right? And he's like, Dad, talk to me about what happened at the Capitol. Talk to me about what's going on. Talk to me about what it means to be Black in America. And my 8-year-old is having these deep conversations, and I am thrown back to being young, and my parents making me watch Roots or watching Eyes on the Prize. And I shouldn't say young, youngish. And I'll share this story, and Dexter, I'm coming to you. My first real eye-awakening moment about color was being 16 and having to drive south. It was the first time I was able to drive, and my parents not allowing me to. We were packing. We're from Chicago, but we were going to Mississippi, and we had to pack chicken, and we had to pack drinks in the car. And mind you, this is late 80s, early 90s, that I'm still not able to stop going south, right? And I remember that being normal to me, right? And fast forward, we're talking 30 plus 40 years later, and we're still having this dialogue, which is why I asked you, Danielle, is this the transition phase? Are we really having the conversation? I will tell you, it feels different. It does feel different. And it feels different even looking through the eyes of my college student who's their diversity, they don't really see color in the same way that I see color. And I say that because I grew up in an all Black community. Her friend set, when they're walking side by side, it's like the United Colors of Benetton, right? And so it's interesting to have this diverse conversation. So Deva, I appreciate you talking about that from a media spin. Dexter, I want to come to you because you and Ron work in unique verticals, right? Construction traditionally isn't seen outside of the labor force as a place where African Americans have excelled in the higher leadership unless they go off to start their own companies. You look at the African American History Museum, the Freelons and those guys, and down in Nashville, there's a big firm, and in Atlanta, there's another big firm. But talk to me about what it looks like to be an African American sitting at the table in a construction environment, having these types of conversations, because I can sense Deva saying it was tough, but talk to me about the different kind of tough. Let me share a quick story. In Chicago, I remember working on a site, and the gentleman drove a Mitsubishi onto the site, and they told him, if it's not an American car, don't come on here. And I laughed, but this is serious. He was a Hispanic man. And he's like, this is the only car I can afford. They said, well, tomorrow you need to catch the bus and come up here. And they told him not to do it again. And they put cement in his back seat. And I think it was two things there. I think it was him being he was Latino. And then there was this whole Buy America piece. But I want to come back to you, piggybacking off Deva. Talk to me about what it means to have a seat at the table in your space, because I think it's a little different than some of the other spaces we've discussed.
True. So like I said before, because of the cultural differences, I had a really good sense of Black identity. However, because there was no representation at the senior level, like you mentioned, and my story is a little different. Later on in my career, I've been with only one company for 20 years. Later on in my career is when I was promoted to vice president. But because there was no representation, I had to second guess everything. So I had to be excellent at everything because I was Black. And some of the things I had to consider, I don't think others had, even though it was normalized. It was, little things like casual Fridays, folks were encouraged to dress, wear jeans and things of that nature. And it may seem trivial now, but I was actually, really had to really contemplate that, because professional Dexter wanted to wear jeans and be, part of my colleagues and do all kind of stuff. But then African-American Dexter needed to consider the ramifications of how would that be perceived by others? Is this going to not allow me to, excel within the organization? Because I never saw my general manager wearing jeans, So some of those things had to be considered and manifested because of me being African American. And you mentioned the pre-George Floyd and post-George Floyd, and I also remember, as I became promoted to vice president and a part of the C-suite, I had to also be conscious of the fact that I need to be, like Danielle said, a lot more vocal in this space. I couldn't sit back and be silent. So all of this is part of that whole, transit. And don't get me wrong, I think Turner has been revolutionary in some of the things that we're trying to do relative to equality and diversion and inclusion. I mean, our ERGs are off to a great start. Our CEO on Fridays are making, big stance on no tolerance on our job sites. jobs that get for stuff that would normally be in porta-johns that are of a racist or unequitable nature. We're doing a great job with our unconscious bias stuff. It's not a perfect company, but once they put their mind to do something, they are going to do it. And they really have been revolutionary in this space. But I also wanted to mention that I think Dexter pre-COVID is a little bit different than Dexter post-COVID, right? So,
Dexter, pause there for me, if you will. Can you stay there and talk about that just a little bit? Give that 2 or 3 minutes. I think that's a big, I was going to come to Danielle with that next, but I think that's a big piece. Yeah.
So I think things that would have probably been discussed internally pre-May 25th, I'm now empowered to say those externally as well too, right? So there was an instance where, when I became vice president, first Black president in that office, I was only vice president without an office, right? So, yeah. Normally, I probably would have been, what, I got the title, I got the respect, blah, blah, blah. But, post-COVID, that's something that needed to be said because, people are now looking at me, looking at race, looking at the position differently, like as they would look at others. And I couldn't allow that to happen. It had to be some equality amongst every vice president. So definitely a shift in focus there.
Thank you very much. So we're at 10:46. Want to bring back up the poll question, and then Danielle, I'm going to come to you. Really quick, here are the answers. Does your company organization have an effective, successful D&I program? 56% say yes. So it's probably 50-50, guys. Are you in a senior level position or in charge of any D&I programs? No, 56% said no. And then lastly, how diverse and inclusive is your current work environment? Wow. I'd say this is pretty split, 30-30-30. Danielle, using what we just saw there, I want to come back to you, and then I want to jump to Ron. Please feel free again. We're getting some great questions in the Q&A box. I hope you guys as panelists feel this is good. If not, push back and tell me, Darnell, be quiet, or ask a different question. I'm okay with that. I've been married for a long time, so I know when to just stop and listen, right? Danielle, you just saw kind of the questions. Two things. Are you surprised at the lack of DEI or diversity and inclusion conversations that have happened? And piggybacking off that, as you're hiring for these particular roles, are you leading with that through the door as folks are widening their lens, saying, are you having those kind of conversations as organizations are looking to quote unquote paradigm shift?
We are having the conversations, and really, again, when you're placing someone in an organization, the objective is to place them in the most fertile ground so that they can thrive, right? You don't want to have someone parachute in as a Band-Aid solution. The whole goal is to create long-lasting change and to have people thrive and grow in their career. And the other piece of that is, to piggyback what Dexter was saying with respect to COVID, post-COVID, post the understanding that people can be virtual, with the understanding that people can work at, do distance working. This is creating a wonderful opportunity for diverse hires, because if you are working in, say, a part of the country that typically is, let's say, inhospitable or hasn't necessarily been welcoming to Black, African-American, Latinx employees, you have an opportunity now to onboard someone, bring them into the fold, bring them in a leadership role, and expand the pool, the talent pool that you're going to look at. More people are allowing people to, stay in place, remain in place. A lot of families, women in particular, are focused on making sure that they're keeping children in school, or at least proximate to schools and family. So all of that's creating a real shift in the market for talent, and how corporations in particular are looking at talent, how they're planning to onboard talent, and sort of bring a new pipeline of individuals into the fold. So I think there are some real positive positives coming out of COVID environment. I think that individuals who are looking to grow their career need to always not only work internally, but also take full advantage. I think one of the questions said, how do individuals, leverage their outside relationships and contacts to sort of create value. Sometimes you're not validated. I know many times in my career, I wasn't necessarily validated internally in my role, despite keeping your head down, doing a great job, doing what needed to be done, rolling with the punches, perhaps not getting the office and rolling with it. But there were times when suddenly you're able to leverage your goodwill within the community through perhaps some of your philanthropic or community-based volunteer organizations. And suddenly, when it's time to do that contract with the company, and it turns out that you happen to, work at the homeless shelter with the CEO of that company, and they wonder, well, how do you know Jack? And it's like, well, we've been working together on Saturdays, handing out food baskets at the Giant. How do you know Jack? So that's really important to understand, that you need to be able to bring your whole person to work, and being able to bring your whole person to your work environment means you're able to do a 360 and have all facets of your life, both in the building and outside of the building, come alive, and you bring that to the table.
And yeah, I appreciate that. Just time check, 10 minutes. We've got 10 minutes left. So here's what I'm going to do. Ron, I'm going to come to you, allow you to, discuss one of the questions that you saw. And you said you had some things you want to talk about on the topic. I want to make sure that there's time at the end to offer each of you 2 or 3 minutes to talk about or lend some advice as a mentor that you'd like to for the audience. Audience, please ask all questions now, because if it's not popping up, it won't get seen. Panelists, please answer those questions if you see them in there, if they're pointed towards you or not. I would love for you guys to please take care of that. Ron, you said you wanted to talk about one of the topics.
Yeah, so I'll try to make it brief. I've got the luxury at Duke Energy to be led by a CEO that is extremely, extremely talented, extremely compassionate, very driven, very focused, and who happens to be a woman. And by Lynn sitting in that seat and making the comment, I was in the meeting when she made it to all the C-suite, that the culture of the company that she's leading is going to be one of DE&I. And if there was anybody around the table that didn't believe that, they need to find another table. And it was a clear, and then she was comfortable with the silence after that. She has made it very clear that at our company, it is okay to have difficult conversations. Things that we didn't normally or shied away from pre-George Floyd, we are encouraged to formally and informally talk about post-George Floyd. So we have started a Let's Talk About It series, and we all talked about in small groups George Floyd and what had happened and who means what and everything else. And we were all encouraged to be uncomfortable. Now, when I thought about being uncomfortable, I thought about everybody else being uncomfortable. What I have had to do, and I will give this to everybody that's listening, be encouraged to be uncomfortable yourself also. Because with that, we've got some different questions that came through that I had to share how I really feel. And typically things that I kept to my house and not necessarily shared at work. I had to share that although I am the guy that I like to laugh and have a good time and, at work, when I had to explain how people felt, although I don't condone violence, but when there were individuals that, were acting violently, I had to share with them my experience at the University of Maryland when, I was the one that ran out on the football field and ripped down the Confederate flag. And they needed to understand that, I'm a really rational guy. But when you get to a point and nobody is doing something, sometimes things happen. So I encourage everyone to be vulnerable, to accept other people's thought processes, although it may not be your own. Sometimes we're having a conversation just to exchange ideas, not to gain consensus.
Ron, appreciate that. So really want to pause here and just say thank you, just in case it doesn't come back to me. I want to offer this opportunity, starting with Deva, to share, some parting words that you'd like to share to the audience. I think we've had some fantastic questions today. And I think this is just the beginning of a conversation. I wish now that we had 2 hours. But I think what we were able to accomplish today is 3 things. One, understanding that we need mentors in this space to help us really understand how to traverse the space. 2, because COVID and pre-COVID, now's the time to talk up. You have the opportunity to be transparent and to have those kind of conversations that may have otherwise been challenging. And lastly, speak up, speak up in your place of business. You now have a platform, not even just in the COVID platform, but virtual allows you to have some things said that may not be taken as abrasive or curt, as they would sitting at the table. Deva, offering your time.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback off of what Danielle mentioned. Right now is such a crucial moment. And while it may, as the African-American in the room, be exhausting, you have to kind of harness it and take it for what it brings and the conversation that it brings. And I think that, just kind of answering one of the questions, how do you call people on it in a way that's effective? And I do think it starts when you're talking to leadership about where we are and where we can be. I think we have to bring up, how are we investing? How are we investing as a company? With us, I know there've been big changes with diversifying production companies that we work with, making sure there's diverse writers in our writers' rooms, taking a hard look at our C-suites and seeing that, what the reality is there, and we all know that, and making change there. So I think in your own way, how can you create the awareness and continue to have the conversation, because it's ongoing conversation that we have to continue to have and push in our areas of expertise.
Thank you, Deva. I really appreciate you being on here today. Dexter, 1 minute. You're on mute, Dexter. All right.
Yeah, don't take that away from my time. Thank you, Darnell. So I want to tackle this 2 ways. I think I want to do a personal commitment as well as a professional commitment. So personally, for me, I would continue to be a mentor and an advocate. We have some great Turner Brainchild programs where we bring awareness to opportunities in our urban areas, as well as the conversations I have with our businesses, our small businesses, our maybe weebies about equity, capacity building, inclusion. I also sit as a sponsor for ERGs within the company. So continue to carry the flag for them and make sure that their concerns and issues are being heard. I heard someone mention it earlier. As I sit in this seat here, I understand my responsibility to ensure that, I make a statement and I, outline and describe what's right or wrong within the company. And although I'm well beyond my college days, I still feel compelled to be a part of our recruiting practices at Turner Construction to ensure that we still have that qualified, diverse talent bank of opportunities and internships, et cetera, et cetera. And professionally, I would like to say to you, Darnell, thank you for having this. I think we need to keep having these difficult conversations, keep digging deeper. Change can't happen if we're silent. In my local vernacular, we need to bust it wide open and have those conversations. And lastly, I'd like to big up my CEO, because although we build a lot of great buildings and do a lot of great things, his words has truly been that this work in the D&I space will be the most important work that we do here at Turner Construction.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dexter. Ron, 30 seconds, and then we're going to close with Danielle. You're the closer today, Danielle.
Okay.
I'm going to be very, very brief. The main thing that I can share with everyone really is to be intentionally uncomfortable, make your organization intentionally uncomfortable, but be mindful to meet them where they are. Everybody is not going to be totally progressive. We want to push the envelope, but we don't want to tear it.
Ron, appreciate that. Danielle, you're our closer.
Okay, great. Look, as the mother of 2 college-age students that are about to go out into the world, I think for the junior folks out there who are mapping their career, it's really important that they find something that they are passionate about doing. This is a time for people to explore new opportunities and to really broaden the capacity. We've had individuals on this panel who represent non-traditional outlets for your talent. And I think that that is the thing that we're encouraging young people to do, because you'll have new and diverse voices in the room. At the senior level, in the C-suite, at the board level, where we're working, again, our firm was founded by a woman at a time when women didn't have opportunities. We're the only executive search firm that has a Black male and proud Morehouse grad as a CEO. We are, changing the conversations and really focusing on bringing, senior leadership and building a pipeline sort of in that mid-tier, so that we don't lose one Black CEO and everyone looks around and says, what happened? So it's really important for people to just, continue to build that pipeline. Every single person you touch can potentially make a difference. And to the extent that we have these uncomfortable conversations, we just need to keep the dialogue going. That's the only way. A diamond's made with constant pressure, and we just have to keep the pressure on.
So I just want to personally thank you guys. This was a powerful, awesome conversation. One of the things that I hope that we get to here in the near future is changing the uncomfortable and making it more comfortable, right? In my business, I like to say turning casual contacts into committed relationships. I want this conversation to become something that is a normal instead of something that is the one-off. So thank you personally from Darnell Burton. On a professional level, I want to thank you guys for taking part in this panel on behalf of Eastern Seals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. I hope that you guys found this to be a productive conversation, as well as the audience. This will be shared on our YouTube page. Danielle, Deva, Dexter, and Ron, can't thank you guys enough for your transparency today. The audience, thank you for your questions. If we've missed anything, I know in our chat area, we've shared some links. Ron, Danielle, Deva, Dexter, I don't know if you want to take 2 seconds to share your emails, or we're going to be sending this out afterwards. If folks want to get in contact with you, Danielle, look for a job, Deva to talk about, the media space, Dexter to really understand construction, and Ron, you seem to be the man of lots of different colors and palettes. I really appreciate that. Thank you guys so very much. Have a fantastic rest of the day. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.